For my senior project, I chose glassblowing. To start off, I would like to review my essential question. Is exploration a reliable way to discover an artist's preferred medium, and/or can you become competent in said medium in a semester-long period? So why did I choose glassblowing? Going into this project, I had very little knowledge about glassblowing or glass art in general, really. I've never felt artistically inclined, and it's honestly been something I struggle with. I had gone on a camping trip last semester, and there was a vendor doing a glassblowing demo on small vases, and I was intrigued from there. The show on Netflix, Blown Away, also played a large part in my interest, as well as the Fireworks of Glass sculpture held in the Indianapolis Children's Museum, made by Dale Chihuly, something I've seen since I was a kid. After starting my internship with the BCGC and doing research, I chose glassblowing out of all of the other glassworks to focus my project on because it felt a bit more ambitious than the others, and I was determined to learn as much as I could within the time I had. When I decided on this project, the next step was to find a shop to work with and someone to be my mentor. The process of doing so was very, very long. It almost got to a point where I had to emergency change my project. I had been emailing Abby Gitlitz, the founder of the Bloomington Creative Glass Center, and eventually just went into her shop, which is located on West Grimes Lane, just off the Beeline, so that I could talk to her face to face. We decided this is something we're both interested in doing together and planned out an internship timeline from there. My mentor for this project is Abby Gitlitz, who has been working with just about all types of glass art there is. In the late 80s, her interest sparked when working with fused glass in high school. Since 1997, she's been focusing more on glass blowing as her preferred art medium. Within the BCGC, she offers classes for jewelry making, stained glass, fusing glass, beginner, intermediate, and expert level glass blowing classes as well. She started the BCGC with the intentions of having it be a place for everyone to come in and have fun working with glass, and she definitely made me feel at home. Through a few different meetings, my mentor and I had come up with a really good internship plan. We agreed I would come in a certain amount of days throughout the week to do any work that she needed done around the shop, and in return, I would get charge-free classes, advice, and help from her. After creating and running through my project outline, we had set up a working class schedule. On Mondays and Thursdays from 2 to 6 p.m., I would come in to do all, if not most, of what is listed on the picture on the right. And on Mondays, after my work shift, I was enrolled in Glassblowing 101, which is the beginner class the BCGC offers, and I'll touch more on my experience in that 4-week class shortly. After that 4-week class ended, I continued to do my work days and spent a lot of my time at the BCGC sorting through glass, which the reason why we do that is because Abby, my mentor, saves the clear glass to reuse it when it's time to refill the furnace. I would spend a lot of time wrapping and shaving down the bottoms of the pumpkins for their yearly pumpkin patch festival. And I had a lot of little projects too, where I would sort other colored pieces of glass for fusing glass or label boxes. This was a fun project that I did. I painted the tool board for her so that it would be easy to know which tools go where. But now I want to get into the different types of glasswork and how much you can do. So fusing glass is a technique that involves connecting 2 or more pieces of glass together with heat from a kiln. Although there are many different types of fusing techniques. Tack fusing is a great example. It's a fusing technique that involves heating the glass until it's just warm enough to stick together. Full fusing, which is the more common technique, is heating the glass until it reaches a molten point. Fusing and kiln forming are the most common terms used when talking about fused art, although those terms are not fully correct, as fusing is just one of the many kiln forming methods. So lamp working is the process in which the glass is melted using a handheld torch, which is powered with oxygen and propane. Once the glass is at a molten state, which is 2000 degrees, you are then able to manipulate it with the tools how you like. The name lamp work originally came from when oil lamps were used to melt glass, but since we don't do that anymore, people often refer to lamp working as flame working or torch work. The amount of things you can make lamp working are endless. 2 examples of different techniques are using glass rods and melting them over the flame. This technique is more commonly used when making smaller, solid items such as beads, or using a punty and gathering glass from the furnace and manipulating the glass with tools from there. Slumping is an example of another kiln forming method and artistic technique. Slumping glass involves using a sheet or sheets of glass, heat, a mold choice, and gravity to make the desired shape. Gravity pulls the sheet of glass to the floor once heated to a liquefied state in the kiln, and from there you can make almost anything. Once the glass melts into the mold, it is then taken and cooled down to room temperature in the annealer. The method of slumping glass is most typically used to make serving pieces such as a platter or a bowl, but the creative process is endless. It really depends on the mold you're using. So glass blowing is the art of using molten glass from a furnace and your breath to create your desired piece. The molten glass is held in a crucible, which is a big ceramic bowl within the furnace, and it's constantly held at 2050 degrees. The process of glass blowing involves working with others. Assistants are really necessary, although the title of the main artist is gaffer. The process starts with a blowpipe, and from there, a layer of glass is gathered from the furnace at the end of the steel blowpipe, and depending on what you're making, it can be taken to the marver, which is a steel table used to roll the glass at the end of your blowpipe to create an even cylindrical shape. After gathering the glass from the furnace, it is extremely important to remember to never stop turning your pipe, as then the molten glass would just fall to the ground or become misshapen. Then the artist will make their way to the bench, which is where the gaffer sits. The molten blob of glass can be twisted, pulled, prodded, and blown into. Within the time from when the artist first gathered their glass to breaking it off and putting it in the annealer, there will be many trips to the reheating chamber, which I will explain exactly what that is shortly. But they do that in order to make sure the glass maintains a heat of above 1000 degrees, as that's considered cold in glassblowing world. Glass is a very versatile material that can really be shaped in any way you can imagine. When you look at glass, you can obviously tell it's a solid, although its molecular structure is random, like liquid. The molecular structure of glass is what makes it transparent. Silica is a high-quality sand which is used to make glass. In order to lower the melting point of glass, different metal oxides are added, as well as sodium dioxide and calcium oxide. These ingredients are all mixed together to make a batch of glass, and then they are put into the furnace and heated at just over 2000 degrees. When working with glass in this matter, it is extremely important to balance and pay close attention to the temperature of it. At just over 2000 degrees, the glass will move like honey on a warm day. After gathering glass out of the furnace, it will begin losing temperature very quickly, which gives you little time to work on it before it is needed to be reheated to the proper texture. To start off, we are going to talk about the pipe warmer. Pipe warmers can be built in different ways and operate in different ways, but their main purpose is to hold the steel hollow blowpipes and solid steel punties over a flame to keep them warm, the tips of them warm before using, because a cold pipe plus hot glass does not work. The furnace, which is the most important machine in glass blowing, the furnace is a big insulated box, which is what is held at 2000 degrees, and inside is the large ceramic bowl called a crucible, which holds the molten glass, typically clear. The glory hole, or the reheating chamber, as some like to call, is very similar to the furnace as it's held at a very high temperature. This machine is used quite often during the process of glass blowing because when you're working with molten glass, it needs to stay above 1000 degrees. The annealer is the machine that controls the temperature drop of glass. Glass has a lot of trouble experiencing the stress of rapid cooling or heating, and it can cause the glass to crack or even explode in certain circumstances. The annealer is to just gradually remove the stress from that process by cooling it down, which typically takes overnight, depending on what you're making. The kiln is a machine very similar to the annealer, and it's more commonly used with fusing glass specifically, although its main purpose is to heat the glass at specific rates in order to achieve your desired outcome. But again, it all depends on what you're making. The bench is where the glassblower does the majority of their work. The bench holds all of the tools the glassblower will need during the process. Benches have metal arms to support the blowpipe or pump T while you're working with the glass on it. The marver is a steel-topped table that the glassblower can use to shape their glass. They were originally made out of marble, which is how they got their name. The tools that are primarily used in glassblowing are jacks, shears, diamond shears, and the tweezers, as well as blocks and molds. To start off, the jacks. Jacks are these metal blades held together at the top with a curved handle. The jacks are used to shape and make indentations in the glass. They're commonly used to make a thin point on your piece to prepare for the crack off. Shears are used to cut the glass while it's still malleable. Diamond shears are very similar to the regular straight shears as they're used to cut and squeeze the glass. One or the other of the diamond shears or the regular shears will be favored by the glass blower depending on what they're making. Tweezers are pretty self-explanatory. They're used to pull, poke, twist, and prod at your glass. Blocks are water-soaked, wooden bowl-shaped tools. They're used to smooth out a gathering of glass into an even cylindrical ball shape. They're soaked in water to create a layer of steam between the molten glass and the wood so that it doesn't burn. Sometimes it does though, and you have to often dip the blocks into the water while working with them. And molds. Molds are used to shape your glass into a preset design. Depending on what the mold is, they are most typically made out of brass, but it can depend on the project the glassblower is doing. I want to touch a little bit on the history behind glassblowing, specifically in Rome. In around 300 BCE, the Syrians invented the blowpipe, which was something really foundational for the growth of glassblowing. From there, during the Roman Empire, there was a lot of experimenting with different textures and shapes in glass using molds. They would also experiment with different colors, such as gold and silver inlays on the glass. Like in the picture, Roman glass often has a very tingy hue to it caused by tiny air bubbles in the glass due to missteps in the firing process, or just general impurities from the glass mixture. Roman glass was often made into cups, bowls, platters, vases, and other food-related serving dishes, but it was also kept for decorative purposes for those who were more wealthy. So a couple of artists that really inspired my project and what I wanted to do for my final piece are Richard Satava, who's on the left, and Carol Milne on the right. Richard Satava's glass work focuses a lot on nature and how to replicate that as best as possible through glass. He started glassblowing in the late 70s and has always stuck to somewhat the same themes. In 1995, after working on his The Moon Jellyfish collection and display, for a few years he had finally perfected it, and it's what he's most known for, which is the picture on the right. His artwork heavily inspired the layout and planning of my final piece. Carol Milne is a Canadian sculptor who works with glass and is most known for her knitted glasswork. In 2006, Carol created a display called Knitted Glass using a variety of techniques, one of which is kiln forming, a technique I mentioned in my fusing glass slide. She takes a very intricate and precise approach to the art, which is something I find extremely inspiring. So the glassblowing one-on-one class was my first glassblowing class, and it was definitely a wild ride. The class was weekly on Mondays over a 4-week period and lasted about 3 hours every session. There were about 5 others in the class to make an even 6, including myself, so we would be able to partner up. Something interesting I noticed during this class and while helping at specific events and live demos is the age group glassblowing tends to attract. At least in my experience, I was only ever really working with an older age group, which is something I found really cool because it speaks a lot for glassblowing. It shows how much glassblowing and glasswork in general can cater to anyone and whatever their creative vision is. But anyway, the first week of the class was spent mostly doing introductions and my mentor explaining the process of what the next 4 weeks would look like. After introductions, Abby started explaining the process of how to make a flower, which is what we did in the first class. And the next week we partnered up to make paperweights. I really enjoyed this week of the class because we really got to play with colors and textures inside of the paperweight, something I can explain more in my demo video at the end. My paperweights are the picture on the left. But for the third week, we made cups, something that was a lot more challenging and frustrating for me. This specific week also really showed me how hard it is to work with a team, something I've grown used to since, but was frustrating in the beginning. The fourth week was spent making more cups and paperweights if we wanted to. My second cup ended up getting destroyed in the process, so I only have the one. But I mentioned what I learned. Overall, the class was really wonderful and an interesting experience, but I definitely learned that glassblowing can be frustrating. It is really something that anyone can do but with a decent amount of practice. The class really made me want to explore more and more options of what I could make with more practice. Glassblowing takes a lot of focus and energy, getting used to working with extremely hot materials, and again, practice. But a funny story from my third week in the class is about this flower. I'm sure some of you saw this flower when I posted it on my glassblowing Instagram. And the reason I got to see it before everyone in the class was because I had my internship on the Thursday before that following Monday, which was the day I had the class. But on that following Monday, we had handed them all out, and one of the other class members, who was one of my favorite, an older man, got really excited when he saw this specific one because he was proud of the work he did. And I was really confused because I could have sworn I used those same colors. But my mentor handed me a different flower, and she said she thought it was the one I made, and I was really sad because it was nowhere near as pretty. And then I got super nervous because I had already posted the other one, and I didn't want everyone to think I was a fraud, and now it's just a funny story. This is the flower that is said to be mine. It looks very different, but either way, I'm genuinely happy he got the flower he was excited about. Later in February, Dylan and I traveled to the Ohio Glass Museum to take a tour, and so I could gain some inspiration for my final piece and just generally what kinds of glass art I like. We got there just before they were going to close, so we didn't get quite as much time there as I wanted to, but either way, I got to see some awesome stuff. First, we got to watch a torch working demo on making beads, although I wasn't allowed to film or take pictures of the demo, unfortunately. But after that, we had a small tour of the building, and then we got to look at the exhibits on our own. We got to see some really cool old photos of glassblowers, which I enjoyed a lot. I love seeing the history and how much it surprisingly hasn't changed. We also got to see a lot of old tools, like the ladle on the right and the ladles on the picture on the right and the blocks on the right. But the rest of the museum was full of beautiful glasswork from all over the world and from many different time periods, which was super cool and not something I've seen a lot of before. A lot of glass from historical times hasn't been preserved well over time because of how fragile it is. So getting to see it all was super inspiring. These were my two favorite pieces from the museum. The piece on the right is called Margaret, and it was made in 1929. But throughout my internship, I would come in and watch certain classes Abby was teaching or to help out at events that were being held at the BCGC. The first event I volunteered for was a Glass Hearts event for Valentine's Day. People who had signed up for it previously would come in for 1-hour sessions and make their own glass heart. It was super fun getting to see everyone's excitement when getting a taste of glassblowing, and it made me feel super important and cool getting to help and answer questions as they were needed. The second event I volunteered for was a fusing event held at Edgewood Primary School in Ellettsville. I got to volunteer with a bunch of 3rd and 4th graders making little fused templates that were eventually going to be turned into one giant piece hung up on the wall at their school. This event took place later in March, so I had a bit more experience working with glass than I had at the Valentine's Day event. Watching these kids come up with their super unique and creative designs was so admirable and inspiring. I really, really enjoyed playing a process and teaching younger students how to work with glass, and it's something I absolutely want to do in the future. So when I first proposed my project idea, I said that I wanted to finish off this semester having created a body of work. I wasn't sure quite yet what that meant, but I decided on making a bell jar ecosystem entirely out of glass. I started by finding inspiration online from artists that I like a lot and honestly just going outside. I wanted to create moss and leaves and sticks, so I gathered all of those things and spent a very weird amount of time looking at them and drawing and trying to replicate them as best as possible. Once I had gotten a good idea of what I wanted to create, I began sketching. I had come up with 3 ideas for the bell jar and made a list of different kinds of bugs and other materials I would want to make and presented them to my mentor, Abby. We discussed the changes that would be needed to be made for it to be less ambitious, as I would often forget that I'm still a beginner. But I decided I was going to start off by just practicing how to make the bell jar in general so that I could nail that down first. Unfortunately, a lot of changes had to be made due to COVID-19 that I will explain in more detail shortly. Even though a lot of changes had to be made in the production of my final piece, I am still extremely happy with what I got to make. This is my bell jar ecosystem. The process of making the bugs was so fun, very time-consuming and precise, but all in all, super fun. Making this piece really made me feel like my project was coming together full circle, and I'm honestly really proud of myself. The picture on the left is the front view. The picture on the right is just one of the side views. And then here are all of the other sides. It definitely looks a lot different than what I originally intended it to, but I'm still happy. So here is my how to make a paperweight demo video. The first step to making a paperweight is choosing and laying out your colors. You can choose up to 3, but today I've chosen 2, blue and purple. The material that is used to color your glass is called frit, and it can come in different sizes. Today I've chosen a fine textured frit. My mentor puts little circle goobers inside of the containers of frit to indicate what the color will look like on your glass once it's finished, which can be really helpful because I've made a few things in the past that have turned a completely different color than what I thought they'd be. The next step is to make your way to the pipe warmer and grab a thick punty, which is used for heavier objects like paperweights. Then you go to the furnace to gather your first layer of glass onto the end of your punty. Then you go to the marver, which is the steel-topped table, to roll out your glass to create an even shape and the perfect base for our paperweight. After marvering, we'll go back to the furnace to make our second gather. This is the layer of glass that we can manipulate, as it's going to be what the inside of our paperweight looks like in the end. Marvering after your second gather isn't always necessary, but I like to do it to maintain that even shape. Now we go in for color. There are different and more precise ways of doing this, but I like to just go for it. Now that we have our color, we need to melt it into the glass using the glory hole. The whole process of making a paperweight is super fun, but this is my favorite step. Once the color is heated into my glass properly, I can sit down at the bench and begin manipulating it with my tools. Using the tweezers, I am pulling the glass outward and folding it onto itself to attempt to make a stringy effect. This is the step where your creativity can run wild. You can use the tools to manipulate the glass however you like to get the desired effect. Although I don't quite have any experience making certain designs like flowers or other such shapes inside of the paperweight quite yet. So I kind of just do whatever, but it always ends up looking pretty cool. Using the tools on our glass caused us to lose a lot of heat, so we'll go back to the glory hole for a reheat. I decided I wanted to do more to my glass, so I went back to the bench to continue. The one condition when making a paperweight is to make sure that when you're manipulating the glass, not to let it get too long or too far off the pipe, as then your third layer of glass is going to be uneven. Now we let it cool down before gathering our third layer of glass. Now we'll go in for our third gather. This layer of glass is really going to be what defines the shape of our paperweight. After making my way back to the bench, I can begin the next step, which is blocking. Using the properly sized, water-soaked wooden block, I can create a perfectly even ball shape to my glass. When working with glass, it's common to need a pipe cool down when your pipe gets too hot. Although it's hard to do by yourself, as you can tell my glass is starting to droop. Maintaining the heat of your glass is really important. The pipe cool down caused us to lose a lot, so we'll go back for a reheat. And then back to the bench to block some more. While blocking, you want to periodically wet the block to make sure that the glass doesn't burn the wood. Once you've reached your desired shape, you will then begin to hold your punty downward so that gravity can pull as much of the material off of the punty as possible. Then back for another reheat, Using the jacks, you will begin to make a thin point on your glass, which will end up being our breaking point or our crack-off point. Now we're at a point where we need to pay closer attention to the temperature of our glass and attempt to maintain a straw yellow color. Now I'm holding my glass upwards so that the weight of my paperweight can fall down, creating a flat bottom. Another reheat. Once you're completely satisfied with the shape of your paperweight, you'll begin the weighting game. These steps are really just to ensure that we maintain the heat of the glass so that it doesn't break off at the thin point before we're ready. That really just means making many trips back to the glory hole to get a reheat. This part of the process can be annoyingly tedious, but either way, it's still fun. And now for the final step, cracking it off. I'm taking a knife with a little bit of water and applying it to the thin point on the glass so that it can start to crack. Now I'm bringing my punty to an upward position and hitting it with a bat to induce stress and cause it to break off. This is the part of the process where you have to act quickly as you're losing heat. I'm taking a torch to the break-off point to try and melt the sharp bits so that it sits flat. Using a spoon, I will flatten down what I just melted. And then it's done. It's ready to be put away into the annealer for the night. There's my mentor putting it away for me, and then there's me really happy that I'm done. So that was my paperweight demo, and on the left is the paperweight that I made in the video, and on the right is one that I did as a practice run right before. So the one on the right is obviously shattered, and that is an example of when you're not heating the paperweight enough. Like I said in the video, it takes a lot of reheats, and it can be really hard to determine when it's ready. So this one unfortunately exploded in the annealer before I got to see it, but I kept the pieces. But how COVID-19 affected my project. When coronavirus began to spread more rapidly and our nationwide quarantine went into place, I had just started the process of my final piece. Again, my original plan was to create some kind of body of work, and I had decided on the bell jar ecosystem and wanted my body of work to be all of the different bell jars and bugs it took me to get to my final desired pieces. Unfortunately, just before I could practice enough and make more, the world came to a halt and changed a lot. All in all, I was lucky enough that I still got to make one, even if it's not the exact one I wanted and planned for. I was also gifted with the supplies to make all of my bugs from home by my mentor, which is something I'm super thankful for. So, reviewing my central question, is exploration a reliable way to discover an artist's preferred medium, and or can you become competent in said medium in a semester-long period? Yes, absolutely. Throughout this semester, I've learned the basics of glassblowing, but also so much more. Exploration is absolutely a reliable way to discover your preferred medium. Even through all of the frustration and confusion and all of the other emotions I felt during this project, it is 100% my preferred art medium. I've also learned that you don't have to have a preferred medium. A lot of my anxiety surrounding art is that I'm afraid it's not good enough, but that's not what art is about. It's about creating things that make you happy, no matter what they look like. So, this project has honestly taught me so much, not just about glassblowing, but about myself in general. Glassblowing is something that really tests your limits, but at the same time, just about anyone can do it. I'm so thankful I chose this for my senior project. If I hadn't, I wouldn't have met my mentor, Abby, and all of the other amazing people at the BCGC. This project has ultimately made me so proud of myself and the things that I can create and now know how to create. So thank you to everyone for making this experience possible, and thank you for listening to my presentation.